And now, for a tale from our travels that particularly tickled our sense of the absurd, presenting Chapter 9, Tropical Truths Beneath the Tart. We found ourselves in Okinawa, an island of automated pineapple wagons and colossal aquariums, where the very ground beneath your feet isn't what it seems. But the most revealing secret might just be served for lunch, a dish invented to satisfy occupying soldiers that explains the whole island. Come get a taste. In layers we trust. Tide hums through new streets, salt, smoke, neon, and fathers. Wheels spin toward the dawn. Faulted foundations, finding the formations of a fractured land. Yesterday was a whirlwind. Today was supposed to be the calm. Today was supposed to be a simple drive to a giant aquarium on the north side of the island. Today, however, had other plans. The morning began not with a gentle sunrise, but with another thunderstorm, as if the sky had unfinished business from the night before. The past few days had been cool, the air in the high 60s, a climate so untropical it felt like we'd taken a wrong turn and ended up in coastal Oregon. The island decided to correct this error with gusto. The day kicked off at 77 degrees, the air thick and warm, the rain coming down in sheets. Driving from one end of Okinawa to the other takes a mere 2.5 hours, a scale that feels less like an island and more like a large, elongated county in Florida. On the way to see the fish, we saw a protest, or the beginnings of one. A line of police officers stood at attention, decked out in riot gear and looking as if they were about to repel a small army. The object of their vigilance was a single woman who looked to be about 90. She stood her ground, possibly giving the assembled force a detailed critique of their posture. Okinawans are known for their enthusiastic protests, often aimed at the American military presence, but sometimes just at a construction project they don't like. This one involved a parade of heavy trucks, but the specific grievance remained a mystery, lost in the quiet standoff between sci-fi armor and a floral print dress. Further on, we passed a man in a hard hat. This wasn't just any hard hat. It had a full wraparound brim, like a Stetson. He was prepared for a world where it might rain cinder blocks and also be high noon at the OK Corral. Then, for a taste of home, there was the A&W Root Beer Drive-In. It advertised American food, with the cheerful confidence of a place that had only ever read about America in a textbook. The building looked uncannily like a Japanese architect's interpretation of a sonnet, a strange and wonderful echo of our own culture. It was on this drive I saw a rock. Not just any rock. Most of Okinawa is limestone, old coral reefs compressed into service as an island. But jutting out from the landscape was a cone, a geological outlier that looked suspiciously like a volcanic plug. It didn't belong. This naturally meant I had to spend the next hour of my life becoming a world-class expert on the geology of the Ryukyu Island arc. It turns out Okinawa is a complicated place, geologically speaking. The island sits where the Philippine Sea Plate is shoving its way under the Okinawa Plate, a tectonic arrangement that guarantees a certain amount of shaking and rattling. While the south is mostly that young limestone, the north is made of much older stuff. We're talking ancient Paleozoic and Mesozoic rocks, things with names like the Nago Formation, full of schists and phyllite that sound less like minerals and more like characters from a Sean Gilbert and Sullivan operetta. These are the island's deep, dark secrets. Scraps of an ancient seafloor scraped up and glued onto the continent millions of years ago. The pointy rock I saw, a peak called Iejima Tachu, is the star of this show. It's made of Jurassic chert, a material significantly tougher and more venerable than the soft limestone around it. The whole thing exists because of something called a thrust fault, which is the geological equivalent of stuffing a book back onto a crowded shelf so violently that it pops an older book out the top. Immense pressure forced this block of ancient hard rock up and over the younger, softer layers. Then, for millions of years, wind and rain washed away the limestone, leaving the hard chert standing alone, a geological monument to being stubborn. Geologists call it a clipper, a wonderfully blunt German term for an isolated rock that got pushed around. So that was it. My mystery rock was a piece of Jurassic bedrock shoved skyward by planetary forces and then patiently revealed as the world eroded around it. Nature does enjoy its slow-motion reveals. Where the currents converge, a deep dive into Okinawa Churaumi Aquarium. Our drive north, past protesting grandmothers and a roadside geology lesson that corrected my rock-identifying hubris, had promised a big aquarium. It did not, however, prepare us for the welcoming committee. As we pulled into the parking lot, we were met by a solid blue wave of Japanese schoolchildren. I counted at least 200, a disciplined, chattering mass that threatened to absorb us like plankton. Our mission was clear: get inside before this tidy tsunami of navy uniforms engulfed us. We hit the entrance at a speed just shy of a trot, slipping through the doors with the grim determination of spies escaping a closing dragnet. They call this place the Churaumi Aquarium, which translates from the Okinawan dialect to beautiful ocean. It's a name that's hard to argue with once you're inside. The Japanese approach to aquariums is a serious business. They have a deep, abiding connection with the sea, and it shows in exhibits filled with creatures you just don't see back home. Take the cuttlefish. They hovered in their tank like tiny, irritable spaceships, all pulsing colors and unnervingly intelligent eyes. We also found a Chinese sea snake, looking vaguely sinister, and my son became mesmerized by a forest of garden eels, tiny heads poking out of the sand. A nearby Japanese child summed up the scene perfectly by squealing, "Kawaii," which I'm told means cute, and not, as I suspected, alert the authorities. But these were just the opening acts. The main event, the reason this place was born from 1975 Ocean Exposition and reborn in its current massive form in 2002, is the Kuroshio Sea Tank. You stand before a pane of acrylic that is 2 feet thick and look out upon a contained ocean. It holds a few whale sharks, the biggest fish in the world, which swim by with the slow, indifferent grace of celestial bodies. Giant manta rays flap past like prehistoric birds. The engineering thoughts that were tangled in my brain about water pressure and structural integrity were quickly silenced by the sheer spectacle. I'm just glad the contractor they hired did not skimp on materials. Nearby, a separate tank held a rogues gallery of other sharks. They even had a great white embryo preserved in a jar, looking like a prop someone stole from the set of Alien. And in another display, a colossal giant squid, caught live and now pickled for posterity, still managed to look formidable. My son stood by the main tank's window, and the photo we took makes the glass look like a transparent fortress wall, which I suppose it is. All this gaping at sea monsters builds an appetite, so we found a cafe with a front row seat to the big show. My wife's coffee arrived with a delicate fish drawn in the foam, a lovely touch of artistry right before they started feeding the whale shark. It slurped up buckets of krill, a messy, magnificent process that scientists are still trying to fully understand. Then came a moment of quiet, personal victory. In a display case, I found a preserved Megamouth shark. This was my third. I'd seen one in Western Australia and another elsewhere in Japan. At this rate, I'm on track to become the world's foremost tourist of deceased, exceptionally rare sharks. It's a niche hobby, but someone has to do it. We followed this triumph with a visit to the manatees. I squinted, trying to place their specific lump-like features. A rare Chinese breed, perhaps? An obscure Okinawan sea cow? Nope. They were from Florida. We'd traveled 7,000 miles to see a creature I could find lolling about near a retirement community in Boca Raton. After admiring the endlessly charming sea turtles, our last stop was the dolphin show. As the sleek performers leaped and clicked, I was struck by inspiration. I leaned over to my family, puffed out my chest, and gave them my best Ace Ventura. "I am trainer of dolphins," I announced with gusto. The surrounding Japanese families, who had been enjoying the show immensely, turned to look at me with a silent, unified expression of profound confusion. A tough room. From Expo aspirations to aquarium acclaim, the 1975 ocean debut. My brief career as a dolphin trainer having ended in silent judgment from several rows of Japanese parents, we were left to wander the grounds of Ocean Expo Park. The brilliant aquarium we just left, with its whale sharks and my personal third-ever Megamouth, was clearly the centerpiece, but the park itself was immense, a sprawling campus of coastal promenades and museums. You don't build something this big for just one aquarium. So, what was the deal? As it turns out, the entire park is a ghost. It's the phantom of an event called Expo 75, a party thrown to celebrate Japan getting Okinawa back from the Americans a few years earlier. It wasn't a full-blown World's Fair, the kind where they invent ice cream cones or unveil a new telephone. It was, we learned, an expo officially recognized by the international body whose entire job, I can only assume, is to go around recognizing expos. The theme was "The Sea We Would Like to See," which has the earnest, slightly hopeful ring of a slogan a middle schooler would come up with. In the 1970s, you could apparently get there from the Naha airport on a hovercraft, a 55-mile hovercraft ride. Suddenly, the dolphin show seemed terribly mundane. The main attraction of this sea-themed festival was a creation called Aquapolis. It was a massive, floating city, a prototype for future marine living designed by an architect from a school of thought called metabolism. This sounds like something you discuss with a nutritionist, but it was actually about designing cities as evolving organisms. In this case, the organism was a giant semi-submersible steel platform built in Hiroshima and towed to Okinawa like a reluctant parade float. It even had its own post office for mailing postcards from the glorious water-based future. It was the pinnacle of 1970s futurism, which meant its primary foe was the 1980s, followed closely by rust. After the expo closed, Aquapolis stuck around as a tourist attraction, but the novelty wore off. Maintaining a giant metal city in the middle of a corrosive, typhoon-prone sea turned out to be, shockingly, expensive. Visitor numbers dropped. The dream tarnished. In 1993, they locked the doors for good. For years, it just sat there, a silent, floating monument to a future that never arrived. Finally, in 2000, it was towed to Shanghai and unceremoniously scrapped. A tragic end for a futuristic city, but probably a fantastic deal for a Chinese scrap metal baron. All this history is thirsty work. After tracing the life and death of a floating utopia, we found ourselves in front of a more modern Japanese marvel, the vending machine. This one offered something called a whale drink. Finally, a beverage with ambition. I bought one, half expecting the rich, blubbery taste of the deep. Sadly, it did not taste of whale. It tasted vaguely of disappointment and sugar. Mostly sugar. A kitschy, golden tribute to the pineapple. Have you ever stood before a great geological marvel, a thing of sublime natural power, only to discover it's actually a farm dedicated to a single spiky fruit? After our previous investigation into the oceanic ambitions of Expo 75 and the sad fate of its floating city, we pointed our car north towards what I had been assured was the rock city of Okinawa. I pictured a basaltic wonder, a volcanic plug thrust up from the Earth's core. What we got was pineapples, thousands of them. The place was called Nago Pineapple Park, a name that, in its defense, hides nothing. This was not a park with pineapples in it. This was a park that had taken the pineapple, studied its every angle, and built a sprawling cinematic universe around it. The experience begins when you are loaded into your own personal, automated pineapple buggy. This is a key part of the process. You don't walk, you are conveyed. The pineapple buggy, a masterpiece of fiberglass engineering, trundles you along a predetermined path at the speed of a thoughtful snail, ensuring maximum exposure to the main event, row after row of pineapple plants. This slow-motion journey through agriculture is accompanied by the most aggressive earworm of a theme song ever composed. It loops endlessly. It is a cheerful, upbeat melody whose sole purpose is to dismantle your free will, replacing it with a singular, all-consuming desire for pineapple-flavored products. The journey is also where you encounter the park's most baffling residents, the pineapple dinosaur hybrids. These plastic monstrosities stand among the plants, a fusion of Cretaceous predator and tropical fruit that somehow predates the plot of a recent blockbuster dinosaur movie. The park's owner is clearly a visionary, a person who looked at a stegosaurus and thought, needs more bromelain. This entire operation, you realize, is a monument to Okinawa's former life as a pineapple-producing giant. When the bottom fell out of the pineapple market, they didn't just switch crops. They built a theme park. It's a strategy of such baffling genius it belongs in a business school textbook. The Pineapple Mobile finally deposits you at the entrance to a vast building, which can only be described as a pineapple gauntlet. You are expertly funneled through a winery producing pineapple wine and pineapple vinegar, and then into a marketplace. Here, a civilization built on pineapple reveals its bounty. There were samples of fresh-cut pineapple, pineapple juice, pineapple cakes, pineapple chocolates, pineapple ice cream, and, for the truly committed, pineapple curry. We ate pineapple. We drank strange pineapple concoctions. And, as the theme song silently echoed in the recesses of our minds, we bought a good deal of pineapple. As we paid for a box of pineapple cakes that we absolutely did not need, I wondered if this was the pinnacle of capitalism. Had we been expertly guided or merely defeated? Rice and Regiment, crafting a classic from culture and commerce. Having survived the relentless pineapple indoctrination program at what I can only describe as a fruit-based cult, a new question emerged. What happens when you apply that same peculiar Okinawan logic of focused intensity not to a fruit, but to feeding American soldiers? You get taco rice. The dish is a cornerstone of the island's diet, a prime example of what happens when one culture looks at another culture's lunch and says, I can make that cheaper and serve it in a bowl. The story of its birth is a masterclass in pragmatic genius. Its inventor, a Mr. Matsuzo Gibo, was the Dr. Frankenstein of Japanese fast food. Running a small parlor in a town pressed right up against a massive US Marine base, he saw a problem. American GIS had an appetite for tacos, but not necessarily the budget. His solution, concocted in 1984, was to perform a brilliant act of culinary surgery. He took the soul of a taco, the seasoned ground beef, the lettuce, the tomato, the cheese, and transplanted it onto the body of a completely different genre of food, a simple scoop of Japanese rice. At first, his creation was met with suspicion. The soldiers, his target audience, wanted the familiar crunch of a corn shell, not this strange, deconstructed pile. They looked upon his creation the way villagers with pitchforks might look at a monster stitched together from unfamiliar parts. But Mr. Gibo's invention had a secret weapon. It was filling, it was cheap, and it tasted exactly like the thing they already loved. Soon the soldiers were won over, and taco rice began its slow, inevitable march to conquer the island, finding its way into everything from school cafeterias to bento boxes. Now you might be thinking this sounds like something a college student would invent at 2 a.m. with the dregs of their refrigerator, a culinary cry for help. And you wouldn't be entirely wrong, but laid out before you, it's a surprisingly harmonious pile that is, for all its exotic origin, basically a burrito bowl from a stateside fast casual chain. It's the perfect symbol of the American-Okinawan relationship. A little weird, born from necessity, and unexpectedly good. Failed fishing. A fortuitous flight. Okinawans are masters of adaptation. It's a skill born from a history of typhoons and foreign occupations, one that resulted in cultural triumphs like taco rice, a dish invented to make American GIs feel at home. Our own plans for the day, a noble father-son fishing excursion, were similarly sunk by a sudden squall. Faced with this meteorological betrayal, we adapted. My son located a brochure for something called water wings, an inflatable couch towed by a jet ski at reckless speeds. It sounded considerably less dignified than fishing. So, naturally, I agreed to go with him. We arrived for our appointment with the Seabiscuit a bit early, which gave us time to observe the local society of hermit crabs. They were everywhere, executing tiny, frantic errands with a seriousness of purpose we could only admire. I briefly considered offering one my car keys, just to see what it would do. Donning my goggles, I took a quick look at the designated reef patch, where a few fish were darting about. One bold specimen even charged right at me. I passed the goggles to my son, who later swore he touched one. I believe him. Though my own policy regarding colourful tropical life is to maintain a distance just outside of its striking range. Strapped onto the inflatable raft, my grand tour of the Okinawan coast was immediately compromised. My son, having forgotten his eye protection, inherited mine. I was thus reduced to experiencing the island's majesty as a high-velocity barrage of salt spray and muffled engine whine. We zipped past a string of limestone caves yawning beneath the Intercontinental Hotel. I couldn't see them, precisely, but I could feel their presence as a sort of deep, resonant dampness against the cliff face. It was thrilling to imagine their dark mouths, carved by eons of water into the very bedrock I'd seen exposed further north. The return trip provided a different kind of excitement. My son, whose shorts were fighting a losing battle against the combined forces of wind and water, hit a particularly aggressive wave. He was instantly ejected from the raft. It was a clean launch, and I must admit, probably the better of two outcomes. The other involved a public de-pantsing at 40 miles per hour. A crewman fished him out of the water, sputtering and grinning. He declared the whole experience a roaring success. Far better than the fishing trip we never had. With our feet on solid ground, we undertook a systematic survey of the hotel's swimming pools, ensuring each was properly conquered. Our aquatic duties fulfilled, we retreated to the room to prepare for a final Okinawan dinner. Tomorrow we would leave the subtropics behind. Our next stop was the mainland, and the old imperial capital of Kyoto. And that brings us to the close of Chapter 9, where our Okinawan exploration showed that everything from its coastal cliffs to its local cuisine is built upon deeper layers of geological and cultural history. Join us next time as we fly into Osaka to examine a different kind of foundation, exploring the commercial spirit and engineering grit that shaped a metropolis, from a sinking airport to the world's first futures market. If you enjoyed this journey, the complete travelogue is available right now as a Kindle book on Amazon, Shinkansen and Sensibility. And if you want to come behind the scenes and get bonus content, you can join my community on Patreon. Continuing our journey on The Rise the Limit, we arrive at Chapter 10, Our Floating World on Sinking Ground. After leaving the ancient geology of Okinawa, we land upon a feat of modern engineering, an international airport built on an artificial island that is slowly sinking into the sea. This arrival introduces us to Osaka, a city defined not by politics but by a pragmatic commercial history that produced the world's first futures market. Our floating world on sinking ground. Island sinks, market gleams, rice futures, bus, old dame's dreams. Osaka, rain-kissed. Flights and fighters, a Naha departure. Most of what we'd seen in Okinawa was serene. Today was dedicated to undoing all that serenity with the modern art of logistical panic. Our first task was to return the rental car, a simple transaction we'd budgeted a generous 30 extra minutes for. This cushion did not, however, account for Okinawan rush hour, which is less a rush and more a geological event. The traffic wasn't flowing, it was a solid, unmoving brick of vehicles, a parking lot with aspirations. We finally surrendered the car 15 minutes past the deadline, a personal first for me. Naturally, the one time I return a car late, it's in a nation where punctuality is considered a foundational virtue. I braced for a stern lecture, maybe even a hefty fine levied in the name of cosmic balance. Instead, we got a shrug and a smile. No extra charges appeared. The next stage of our managed retreat was Naha Airport. The rental agent had advised arriving 2, possibly 3 hours early. This suggested a gauntlet of chaos and bureaucracy, a multi-act play of security checks and existential dread. The reality was a bit of a letdown for anyone hoping for drama. Security took less time than it does to choose a snack at a convenience store. Our boarding passes were QR codes on a phone, which zipped us through the gate without so much as a pause at a kiosk. Was this it? We had steeled ourselves for a bureaucratic siege, and all we got was a polite, efficient wave-through. In what was becoming a running theme for this trip, not a single person asked to see identification. I'm beginning to suspect my official identity in Japan is purely theoretical, a concept confirmed only by my credit card's willingness to pay for things. The flight to Kansai International Airport, KIX, was a 2-hour jump on a 737. The airport code itself sounds less like a major travel hub and more like a brand of breakfast cereal that promises fun but delivers only mildly sweetened corn puffs. As our plane taxied toward the runway in Okinawa, the view out the window shifted from vacation to geopolitics. Parked on the tarmac was a significant display of Japanese military hardware. Black Hawks modified for long-range missions, sleek F-15, and a few bulky P-3 Orion surveillance planes. It was an impressive sight, a quiet reminder of national defense. Then you glance a little further down the field, and the American base at Kadena seems to make the Japanese presence look like a well-funded flying club. Shifting strata supporting a sinking skyway. Our 2-hour flight from Okinawa, which had included a brief but impressive air show of Japanese and American military might, landed smoothly. We deplaned at Kansai International, or KIX, an airport whose name sounds like a brand of high-fiber cereal for daredevils. It's an appropriate name because the entire airport is something of a dare. It's a spectacular feat of engineering built entirely on a man-made island plopped down in the middle of Osaka Bay back in the 90s. The catch, and there's always a catch, is that it's sinking. The whole audacious project began because Osaka was getting its clock cleaned by Tokyo in the great game of international air traffic. Its old airport was landlocked and noisy, so the city's leadership did the only logical thing. They decided to build a new one in the ocean. The problem was that the floor of Osaka Bay has the structural integrity of a bowl of lukewarm jello. The engineers, bless their ambitious hearts, solved this by driving 1,000,000 sand-filled drains into the clay seabed to suck the water out, a process that sounds less like civil engineering and more like a planetary-scale spa treatment. Then they dumped the contents of 3 mountains on top. This worked mostly, but the island has been gently sinking ever since, in a slow-motion face-off with gravity. The main terminal, a magnificent 1.7-kilometer-long building designed by Renzo Piano to resemble a glider, has a neat trick up its sleeve. The entire structure rests on about 900 columns that can be individually jacked up. When a section of the floor starts to droop, a team comes in and shoves some metal plates under the pillar, leveling it out like a wobbly diner table. For all our advanced technology, from QR codes that got us onto the plane without anyone checking our names, to an airport that can survive an earthquake, the ultimate solution is still just sticking a shim under the leg. Once we collected our bags, we headed for a bus to take us into the city. The operation was managed by a pair of gentlemen easily into their 70s. Dressed in crisp uniforms, they handled the luggage and tickets with an air of profound seriousness, projecting a force field of absolute intolerance for any form of tourist foolishness. There was no friendly chatter, just a clipped, purposeful efficiency that got every bag loaded and every passenger seated. It was an admirable dedication, a beautiful, unsmiling ballet of getting the job done. The bus, now full, pulled away from the curb, heading north across the long bridge to the mainland. Osaka, where commerce casually invented modern fun. The bus hummed its way off the engineered miracle of Kansai's sinking airport and onto solid ground, or what I assumed was solid ground. Staring out the window, I couldn't shake the image of the elderly gentleman who had loaded our bags with the grim efficiency of bomb disposal experts. That intense, no-nonsense focus wasn't just airport protocol, I was beginning to realize. It's the city of Osaka's factory setting. This is a city famously known as Japan's kitchen, and its entire history reads like a business plan. While Tokyo was busy with the lofty theatrics of being the political capital, Osaka was the rowdy national marketplace during the Edo period, the country's rice exchange, the guy in the back room actually counting the money. This commercial DNA produced a local character that is practical, clever, and profoundly uninterested in stuffy formalities. Osaka is about getting things done, ideally with a hot snack in hand. You see this pragmatism in the city's most glorious exports. Consider the humble instant noodle. In 1958, a man named Momofuku Ando, a figure who should be canonized as the patron saint of students and anyone who has ever stared into a fridge at 11 p.m. with profound despair, invented the stuff right here. It's the perfect Osaka story. See a problem, apply some clever thinking, and create a global empire out of a dehydrated brick of carbs. But 1958 was a banner year for Osakan ingenuity. As if revolutionizing cheap meals wasn't enough, the world's first conveyor belt sushi restaurant also opened here that same year. The founder, Yoshiaki Shiraishi, reportedly got the idea from watching beer bottles chugging along a conveyor belt at a brewery. That's the entire city summoned up in a single thought bubble, observing an unrelated industrial process and concluding, I could use that to sell raw fish on rice faster. It's commercial genius, pure and simple. This mindset built the city's hyperactive heart, the Dotonbori district. Today, it's an electric canyon of giant mechanical sea creatures and blinking advertisements, but it started in 1612 with an entrepreneur named Yasui Doton. He sank his own fortune into digging a canal to boost local business. He then had the terrible luck to die during the siege of Osaka before it was finished. His cousin completed the project, and the government later zoned the area for entertainment. They essentially created a designated zone for fun, which proved to be a fantastic business decision. Sophisticated bunraku puppet theater, requiring 3 operators per puppet, even flourished here, proving that Osakans could be both cultured and commercially shrewd. Even the city's main landmark, Osaka Castle, tells a story of stubborn persistence. The original, built by a 16th-century warlord, was a showstopper meant to be the center of a unified Japan. It was destroyed, rebuilt by the next regime, and then the main tower was struck by lightning and burned down. The current version, a ferro-concrete behemoth from 1931, wasn't a grand government project. It was funded largely by donations from the citizens of Osaka. It's a hard-nosed refusal to let a little thing like total destruction get in the way of having a perfectly good castle, which is, after all, good for civic pride and even better for tourism. Standing there with the scent of grilled octopus in the air and a giant crab waving its claws above my head, all that history clicks into place. This city wasn't just built on rice and commerce, it was built on a kind of magnificent practical spite. The big castle, the endless food, the wild neon river. Futures forged. The fortunes of feudal finance. I had been warned that Osaka was a city built on shrewd commerce, a place where the spirit of enterprise was in the tap water, so it was fitting that my first act upon arrival was a financial blunder. The 15-minute walk from the bus stop to our hotel happened in a rain that was more of a persistent, clammy handshake than a downpour. Now, some might argue that saving $30 by taking the bus instead of a taxi is prudent. They would be wrong. The bus tickets for the whole family came to about $40. A $70 taxi would have been faster, spared us the wait, and dropped us, dry and triumphant, at the hotel's front door. It was my first Osakan business deal, and I had already managed to short myself on both comfort and common sense. A lesson in travel economics, filed away for never. This city practically invented the futures market, and here I was, failing basic arithmetic. As we navigated the wet pavement, it was impossible not to think about the ghosts of commerce under our feet. The Dojima rice market, given the official nod by the Tokugawa shogunate in 1730, wasn't just a place to buy rice. It was an 18th-century Wall Street, where merchants in kimonos invented a system so advanced, it makes you wonder if they were hiding a Bloomberg terminal behind a paper screen. Samurai, paid in rice, lived and died by its price. So these Osakan merchants created rice bills, which were basically promises for future rice, sometimes for harvests that weren't even planted yet. How did a group of men trading promises for a crop that didn't exist end up creating the blueprint for modern commodity trading? It was a system born of necessity and hustle. The market had standardized contracts, a rudimentary clearinghouse to settle debts, and exclusive membership. To get the latest prices out, they used couriers and a network of flags, a kind of analog fiber optic network for grain speculation. The action was so intense that officials reportedly had to splash water on the brokers to get them to go home after the closing bell. Naturally, this sort of high-stakes gambling with the nation's food supply had its moments. The market was a theater of booms and busts that could wipe out a fortune overnight. In the 1730s, after a few bad harvests and some clever market cornering, things got ugly. The price swings led to riots where starving citizens, armed with farm tools, went after the speculators. It was a stock market crash with immediate, visceral consequences. The shogunate, who preferred order above all else, kept stepping in. They'd set price floors, reorganize the exchange, and try to regulate the chaos, all while quietly admitting they needed this economic engine too much to ever shut it down. Our own quest was less about market stabilization and more about finding the hotel reception. After checking in, we ventured out for food. In a city celebrated as a global culinary capital, I confidently led my family to the Hard Rock Cafe. This decision was driven entirely by an inexplicable pull of nostalgia on my part. The rest of the family simply tolerated my temporary lapse in judgment. After a meal that was geographically misplaced but emotionally satisfying, we wandered a bit more. My son got a crepe, and we made the mandatory pilgrimage to a Lawson convenience store for supplies before retreating to our room. Now, we wait. The primary source of low-grade worry is the collection of QR codes for tomorrow's adventure. On previous trips, we had paper printouts as a failsafe, a tangible anchor in a sea of digital uncertainty. This time, we're going all in on pixels. My confidence is a solid 9 out of 10, but there's a persistent flicker of doubt, a vision of myself trying to explain the concept of the cloud to a park employee who only speaks the language of scannable barcodes. It feels like a small futures trade of our own. In his 17th century Guide to Prosperity, the Osakan writer Ihara Saikaku noted, "Reckoning is the mother of all things." He was probably talking about business, but it felt right for the eve of a day dependent on a Wi-Fi connection. And so our time in Osaka reveals a city defined by ingenious fixes for precarious situations, from an airport built on jacks to the world's first futures market. It suggests that the most durable foundation isn't soil or stone, but a stubborn, resourceful mindset. But how does this grand spirit of problem-solving apply to more personal troubles? Next time, we'll see if the answer involves a robotic cat from the future. If you enjoyed this journey, the complete travelogue is available right now as a Kindle book on Amazon, Shinkansen and Sensibility. And if you want to come behind the scenes and get bonus content, you can join my community on Patreon. And now for a tale from our travels that particularly tickled our sense of the absurd, a story we call A Pocket Full of Purchased Time. We found the most impressive futuristic gadget at Universal Studios Japan wasn't a ride, but a pass that lets you buy your way out of waiting, a solution straight from the playbook of a certain robotic cat from the 22nd century. Here's how paying to skip a queue led to a surprising insight into Japan's official anime ambassador. A pocket full of purchased time. Time's robotic cat bears gifts from tomorrow's void. Friendship conquers fate. Frantic fun, frustration and forensics in Japan. The good news is, last night's low-grade anxiety over our digital-only passes was for nothing. The QR codes scanned. The gates to Universal Studios Japan opened. Our grand expedition could commence without being thwarted by a technological hiccup at the first hurdle. We were up with the theme park employees, arriving around 7 in the morning for the main event. They've added a security check since our last visit, a minor hurdle we cleared before joining the great MASS of humanity poised for the opening bell. When it came, the crowd didn't so much walk as pour itself into the park. A human river flowing with singular purpose toward Nintendo Land. It was like watching a documentary on salmon migration if salmon wore Mario hats and were desperately trying to get into a restricted area before it hit capacity. Our target was Donkey Kong, the newest ride in this corner of the park. We found the queue and a cheerful attendant who informed us that, from our current spot, we were looking at a 3-hour wait. 3 hours. I did a quick mental calculation. In 3 hours, you could watch a feature film, assemble a moderately complex piece of furniture, or in our case, simply stand still. This was the single rider line, a lane that in most theme parks operates with a certain brisk efficiency. Here, it seemed to be a social experiment in testing the limits of human patience. A strategic pivot was required. We abandoned Donkey Kong to his barrels and sought refuge in Yoshi's Ride. It's a gentler affair, designed for the juicebox crowd, but it had one towering advantage. Mom could ride it without her breakfast, making a dramatic reappearance. That's a win. Speaking of breakfast, We grabbed some Mario-themed food at the same eatery we'd visited last time, then prepared for the day's intellectual centerpiece, the Detective Conan escape room. Now, to understand the full magnitude of our impending failure, you need to understand the premise of Detective Conan. The hero is Shinichi Kudo, a brilliant 17-year-old detective who gets on the wrong side of a shady syndicate, is forced to swallow a poison, and shrinks down into the body of a 7-year-old. While trapped in a kid's body, his mind remains a steel trap. He solves impossible crimes by subtly feeding clues to his girlfriend's bumbling private eye father, all while hunting the organization that wronged him. His alias, Conan Edogawa, is a nod to Arthur Conan Doyle and the Japanese mystery writer Edogawa Ranpo. It's about supreme intellect prevailing against all odds. So there we were, inside a complex 2-hour challenge themed around this boy genius, a game of logic and deduction sandwiched between live theatrical scenes. The puzzles were intricate. The clues were subtle. Our performance was anything but. I found myself staring at a pictograph thinking, what would a 7-year-old super detective do here? He probably wouldn't conclude, as I did, that the fish symbol was a subtle hint to go get lunch. We were a spectacular affront to the spirit of the entire franchise. My family did not cover ourselves in glory. After 2 hours of being comprehensively outsmarted by a fictional child, what's the proper response? Robotic relations, rides, realities, and Japan's roundest representative. Our spectacular failure to solve crimes alongside a boy genius in the Detective Conan challenge left us needing a new hero. Where Conan is a brilliant mind in a child's body, Doraemon is an average child who gets access to a brilliant mind's toy box. This seemed like a more appropriate speed. We dived into the Doraemon XR ride, a tour through the world of Nobita Nobi, a kid so perpetually unlucky that his own descendants sent a robot cat back in time to save him, and by extension, their inheritance. The ride was a chaotic plunge into the 22nd century, full of futuristic gadgets. Doraemon's main trick is a fourth-dimensional pocket on his belly, a sort of magic pouch that holds solutions to Nobita's problems with bullies and homework. It felt like a perfect metaphor for the express passes we now clutched in our hands. After our time-traveling cat adventure, we migrated to the world of Harry Potter. I took a spin on a hippogriff. The good news is that, unlike on previous trips, I was not politely invited to exit the ride for being built on a robust American chassis. Progress is progress. We then refueled with some Mario-themed tacos and churros, a culinary fusion that I'm sure has a rich history in the Mushroom Kingdom. This naturally led to the Waterworld stunt show. I've always been fond of that movie, a glorious flop that refused to die, and the live show's mix of jet ski acrobatics and deafening explosions was an impressive tribute. Armed with our matured passes, we revisited Nintendo World with the grim efficiency of a corporate raiding party. Humility was for the morning crowd, the afternoon was for victory. We zipped through Mario Kart, took another leisurely spin on Yoshi's back because the pass demanded it, and finally stared down the queue for Donkey Kong. Mom joined us for this one. After being buckled in and flung around a track cleverly designed to hide its rails, creating the illusion of jumping over perilous gaps, she offered her official review. "Dramatic," she declared, with the gravity of a seasoned critic. With all due respect to her expert opinion, it is a ride designed for people who still count their age on one hand. The whole day was an interesting study in Japanese cultural exports. 1 minute you're a detective, the next you're a plumber, the next you're a kid getting help from a blue robot. Doraemon's world is one of simple problems and gadget-based solutions, memory bred to pass a test, a tiny propeller hat for flight, a jelly that makes you fluent in any language. These aren't weapons, they're tools of convenience. This simple, optimistic view of childhood has made the earless cat a titan across Asia. It resonates so much that in 2008, the Japanese Foreign Ministry officially named Doraemon the country's first anime ambassador, a diplomatic post he has likely filled more effectively than any human. As a final note on cultural exchange, I observed that the wizards and witches populating the park's Harry Potter section were all conspicuously white. In Japan, it seems, a firm stance against cultural appropriation meant hiring actors who looked the part. Back home, a firm stance is a stance we're not always so firm on. That concludes Chapter 11, A Pocket Full of Purchased Time, where an express pass acted much like one of Doraemon's futuristic tools, buying us a perfectly scheduled day. Join us next time as our journey shifts from the curated efficiency of a theme park to the chaotic reality of a World Expo, putting the Japanese concept of omotenashi to the test against oppressive heat and massive crowds. If you enjoyed this journey, the complete travelogue is available right now as a Kindle book on Amazon, Shinkansen and Sensibility. And if you want to come behind the scenes and get bonus content, you can join my community on Patreon. Thank you for listening to The Rise the Limit.